Good evening, everybody. I'm going to take this video outside. I'm going to have a little walk around and a little talk and show you a few things. But before I do that, I'm just sitting here by my laptop, which is my main source of communication with the outside world. And someone called Elizabeth Albeltrup, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Elizabeth. She emailed me yesterday with a few questions, so I'm just going to read part of the email and then I'm going to try to answer some of these questions. Dear Colette, first of all, thank you for your very inspiring videos on YouTube. At the time being, I watch them daily and they are calming and soothing for me at a time when different aspects of my life are a little bit chaotic. Well, I understand that. Got to keep the chaos at bay because that's the world of man, and chaos equals fear. And that's why the politicians and the powers that be love to create chaos, keep us all in fear. Now, this is running very, very slow, this laptop. Right. So, Elizabeth says, I wonder if you would take the time to answer a few simple questions from me. Number one, when you began your planting, did you have some kind of a master plan for planting? I mean, for instance, I would also like to have paths in the woodland and wonder if I must plan an overall layout for the plot or if it is possible to create this lush beauty by just planting along. Okay, well, first of all, Elizabeth, and for anyone else who's interested, I did not have a plan that I put on paper. I kept my plan in my head because I tried to keep the vision going, and by envisioning what I was hoping to achieve, I think that really bolstered that energy that the land needed. So I didn't have a master plan. And because I didn't have a master plan, I was more heavily involved in exploring my land and becoming intimately connected to the land. So I walked it not just daily, but 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times daily. I got to know the land. And in getting to know the land, I found the most advantageous places to plant trees and shrubs. I think drawing up a plan without really knowing your land, and I mean really, really knowing it, not just tripping over it once or twice, but living with the land, actually living with it. You've got to understand where all the good bits are, where all the wet bits are, where all the rocky bits are. You know, you've really got to know where you're going to plant. Otherwise, all you're going to do is just go in there and recreate a piece of land. That I would be fundamentally opposed to. You've really got to work with the land. This has been the problem now for thousands of years, that we have stopped connecting to the land. We have stopped working with her. So find the best places to plant. And you will also find that you have made pathways, natural pathways, and I've explained this in previous videos and on my website. The website is bealtainecottage.com. There's about 1,100 blogs on there and 15,000 or more photographs, and it's all free and no advertising. Please take a look, and if you need to know a bit more about that, whatever your keywords are, put them into your search engine, followed by Bealtaine Cottage, and the relevant blogs will probably come up. So Question number 2. How did you protect your trees and shrubs from competition from weeds in the beginning? I'm aware that later in the process it is all about dense planting, but don't expect that to be possible in the beginning. It is possible in the beginning, and I've explained this in videos and in blogs. I planted densely in the beginning. As trees and shrubs need more room, you go along and you can either go to the trouble of taking things out or just let the strongest ones win. I don't think I've had to go along and take anything out, really. Plants will grow in fairly robust and healthy competition with one another, but they will get to a point where some of them become more dominant, and you can let that happen. And that's what I've done here. So how did I protect them from competition from weeds? Well, I didn't really. I didn't. I put plants in, and you will find that, weeds in the main have fairly shallow roots, with the exception of stuff like mare's tail, horsetail. And those roots go down very, very deep because they're pulling silica up from the ground. And there are a few others as well, like comfrey and whatever, but generally I didn't bother too much. I did mulch around trees that needed a little bit more TLC, and I mulched with cardboard and sheep's wool. I say sheep's wool because there was sheep on the hill behind Bealtaine Cottage, and I was able to get the sheep's wool for little or nothing. And it's a fantastic source of food. It's packed with nitrogen and phosphates and whatever, and it's absolutely brilliant and biodegrades pretty quickly down into the soil. And in the meantime, it acts as a wonderful mulch. Question number 3. How dense did you plant? It looks rather dense, but wherever I read about forestry, I find a lot about spacing. Look, I broke every rule that was ever written. There's so many dictates out there about you plant this, you plant that, you don't plant this is how close, you keep things so much apart. I ignored every rule that was ever written. I just went along and I planted intuitively. And everything I planted grew. When I say planted, an awful lot of what went into the ground didn't even have roots on it, because they were just cuttings. They were just cuttings I stuck in the ground. All my blackcurrant bushes, bar 2, are all grown from cuttings stuck straight into the ground. I say bar 2 because I bought 2 blackcurrant bushes in the beginning. Now I've got, I don't know, maybe 75, 80 blackcurrant bushes. Question number 4. Did you start with the edges to protect the rest of the land from prevailing winds? Well, the prevailing wind comes in from the west here, and that's where the hedgerow is down along the driveway, and I planted very densely into that. No, I didn't plant with the edges, I just planted. Do you know, from my perspective, and from looking back over the past 13 years, there's a few things that I would add, knowledge that I've built up. Number 1, when I say plant like your life depends upon it, for it does, I really mean that. I mean, stop thinking about it, just get out there and plant. We've got to let go of this need to control things. Just go out and plant. Let Mother Earth decide whether that's good for her or not. Don't leave spaces. If you've got spaces, things are going to get in there that you don't want, or plants are going to you know, move into spaces where they shouldn't be. For example, I've got loads of bamboo here in the garden. But where I've planted bamboo, there's nowhere for it to go other than where I've planted it. I've got Gunera manicata, which is a massive problem out in Achill Island. Well, I'm not surprised it's a massive problem out in Achill Island because there's nothing else growing out there. So of course it's going to take over. Those are the 4 questions. Okay, Elizabeth, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go outside and hopefully I can keep those questions in my head, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. So many people are nervous about planting. We should not be nervous about planting stuff. And don't let other people put you off either, because there's always a fairly big pack of people out there who'll say, oh no, you shouldn't plant that there. Or that's not the kind of plant you should put in. Or why are you planting a species that isn't indigenous? There's so much happening in the world. There's so much has changed over the past, 20 or 30 years that we've got to come out of all that nonsense and just plant. We've made so many mistakes. In fact, virtually everything we've ever done with Mother Earth has been a massive mistake. Mistakes continue to be made. Just plant biodiversity. Plant as many species, varieties as you can. Let Mother Earth be the judge. Because do you know something? If the birds are singing and the butterflies are there and there's masses of bees and you've got frogs and you've got foxes and badgers and lots of mammals and water rats and herons coming down to your pond, what have you done wrong? That would be my question. Putting it out there to so many people who've scolded me and said, oh, you shouldn't have planted that there, that's not indigenous. Usually it's someone who isn't terribly indigenous either who's telling me this. So we've really just got to let go of all this and just plant. Just plant. Plant and fingers crossed, hope for the best. Planting something is better than planting nothing. Now, for those of you who were asking about where Beauty was, well, here she is. You see, with Beauty, what I do, because she's a little female cat and she loves to hunt, I bring her in first thing in the morning. I give her a massive big breakfast and a massive big lunch, and she just lies on the sofa here and she spends the whole day sleeping. And that way, all those little birdies out there are quite safe. And she goes back out at night and she hunts the things that perhaps there may be too many of. Because we don't have owls here, you see. Unfortunately. But it's always possible that we can get owls back in. Right. So, look around this way, Jack. So planting. Where do we plant? What do we plant? Paths. Do we make paths first? Well, no, we don't really. We don't make anything. We can go out and, by the simple act of walking your land and getting to know your land, you will find that paths emerge. That's what's happened here. I didn't go out and plan any paths. Planted into the hedgerows, or the hedgerow, there's just one here. Planted very densely into that. So you can see here, the original hedgerow is about 8 or 10 feet back in all this density. What I've done here, because I have planted very densely, and I did that at the very beginning, but it didn't look that dense in the beginning, obviously, because so much of it was just either tiny little plants, plants that I'd grown from seed, shrubs that were just cuttings. So for example, this beautiful flowering currant, the ribes, that was just, I think, 2 or 3 little cuttings stuck into the ground. What I've done over the years is I've gone in and sort of almost semi-cleared an area. So for example, last year I went in, because all this had grown about 10-15 foot high, and I wanted to give a few things that I'd planted years before a chance to grow, like there's a cotoneaster in there, you can just see it. And so I cut back really hard the laurel, and I cut back the photinia, that beautiful red-leafed, it's nicknamed Red Robin, and I cut back quite hard the ribes. All the ribes you see there, that's just this year's growth. All that's new growth. So there's lots of new growth here, but don't worry about planting things too closely together. Just plant and let them grow. Try to step away from that human need that we have in us to control Mother Earth, which we see now from these storms that we're getting. We have no control over her. We think we have, but we haven't. So just plant. And if you plant with birds, bees, butterflies in mind, like I've done here, take yourself out of the equation. Just plant for others. So think in terms of what the bees need, what the birds need, what small mammals need, what frogs and toads need. So think about the needs of the other life forms. Because I think, well, I think I've proved it here really, that when you do that, you come up, you end up with a very nurturing habitat. This habitat nurtures me. It nurtures my soul. Jack? Come on. So we're just going to go in here, look, on the right. And I'm going to show you an example. Well, I can just show you from here, really. This is an example of bamboo. I planted this bamboo 13 years ago. There it is. There's the original little path. It's still going because I walk the paths. The bamboo is clump forming. It hasn't detracted or taken away from the trees around it. So you can see the trees are very healthy around that. Come on Jack, come on, up this way. I use the bamboo as a form of biomass. So I cut it and I put it through the shredder and then I put it all back out again on the land. Because as you can see, There's some absolutely wonderful, for this, see? Absolutely wonderful mulch. There's some little mushrooms coming up down there. It also affords a massive amount of protection for wildlife during storms, because the wind can barely get through there. And so just on the lee side of the bamboo, there's a very kind of a nurturing little habitat in here, a little microclimate. See? There's the cottage up there. You can just about see it now. Jack? So, paths, okay. There's a little path that I actually opened up about 2 years ago. You see? Going through there down to that ash tree. You can also see in here massive clump of bamboo. And there's a horse chestnut tree, look, growing up alongside it. Well, the horse chestnut tree is fine because those roots go down far deeper than the bamboo. I mean, so far I haven't had to take any bamboo out. Now, this is Goddess Permaculture. It's got nowhere to go. It can't move out of there. It's been hemmed in by a lot of shrubs. It's also been hemmed in by this beautiful cherry tree that 13 years ago was brought from London in a little coffee cup. That's how tiny it was. It's also been hemmed in by willow and other shrubs. So it can't really move from there. So in terms of it being an invasive species, do you know what an invasive species is? In my book, an invasive species is simply a plant that's growing in an area where nothing else is growing. Of course it's going to spread. That's the nature of plants. They want to spread, they want to grow. So this was a massive, very wide path, and now as you can see it's become very narrow. And look in there. That's where I throw lots of cuttings. Whatever I cut, I throw back down in the earth. And not only does that create habitat in the short term, but in the long term it creates incredible food for the earth. See? So I'll follow this little path that takes me down through the fairy wood. And the only reason why it is a path is because it's been walked. Because I've spent 13 years walking this. And this is just trying to think actually why I walked this. I think, yeah, I remember now. I was clearing lots of brambles, and this is basically just the kind of clear way that I cut through the brambles. Then this is another little path that I opened up fairly recently, and again just by walking and going along there with secateurs and just trimming back whatever needed to be trimmed. Now look who's coming. Do you remember what I said last night about this fella loving to be out with Jack? Here we go. The two boys. They'll be playing around me now. So, a little bit wet down here. It was raining very hard last night. He's going to jump up in that tree. He always gets a bit freaked out when he comes down here into the fairy wood. You know, I do believe that cats especially, see things that we don't. They're very close. They're very close to the sort of magical in life. There's no point in meowing at Jack. He turns around and actually tries to talk to Jack. Oh, he's going up the fairy tree. See, this is why I don't edit videos. Because there's such a natural flow to them. I don't know what's going to happen next in any of these videos. Now I hear lots of water flowing. So I think the spring well is really pumping out a lot of water. It looks pretty innocuous, doesn't it? It's just a little pool. Just a little pool of water. But as I move down here and just look at this, look at the flow on this. Massive amount of water now being pumped out from the aquifer. Ground is very wet. Squelch, squelch. I will need to get some gravel down on these paths, I think, quite soon. Oop. So look how much water now is coming out of that spring well. There's a little mannequin there, look, following me. So this path, as you can see, just followed the trench that I dug out for the water to flow out of the spring well. And then the path then follows alongside these Scots pines that I put in. And they were just tiny little trees. But I put them in as a way of helping to preserve the bank where the water flows down in that stream, you see. Because it can be quite heavy at times. So, there we go. That's planting and pathways and